Alatreon is an elder dragon introduced in MHTri. He is the second of 3 black dragons to be introduced to the series, with the first being Fatalis and the third being Diamoralis. While those 2 dragons have long bodies and walk on their hind legs, Alatreon is more like Kushala Daora in how he moves, running around on all 4s. He's still fairly large and has the ability to use almost every element. Alatreon was the final online boss of MHTri, a game that officially has gone offline. He was encountered all the way at HR 50 and was the only standard sized elder dragon in that game. He's fought exclusively in a special arena called the Sacred Land, located near a volcano. The footage for Try Alatreon was very kindly provided to me by Twitter user GandalfSoda. Alatreon is capable of elemental and physical attacks. He can charge at you, ending with a head swing. He can swipe his arm, smash down with both arms, and leap in the air before quickly diving down. His tail is massive, and many of his attacks will have it swing behind him, knocking you away. Alatreon has the very unique and special ability to use up to 4 different elements: fire, dragon, thunder, and ice. He can launch stationary fire tornadoes, switch his tail behind him to spread more fire, and release dragon energy while charging. Alatreon starts the fight grounded, rushing around and performing many of these attacks. However, he will eventually roar, and his horns will begin sparkling with thunder energy as he charges them up. After enough time has passed, he will change colour to be more blue, and begin flying in the air. This is commonly referred to as flight mode. Alatreon will perform a wide variety of aerial attacks, including a rush that causes high wind pressure and slamming his arms down up to 4 times, which causes tremors. While flying, he will imbue these physical attacks with thunder elements, but he is also capable of firing an icy laser, creating icy chunks that fall onto you, and flying high into the sky and doing that on a larger scale. He can even spin mid-air, swinging both his horns and tail. While it is possible to bring Alatreon down with a flash bomb, it is only temporary, as he'll soon rise back up. Sometimes he will land while still in flight mode, and perform ground attacks, and in this state they will not cause dragon blight. When he hops backwards like this, he will take to the air. Eventually he'll go back to ground mode, switching to using fire and dragon elements once again. That's the whole fight. He goes from using grounded fire and dragon attacks to using aerial thunder and ice attacks, back and forth. Flight mode is generally more difficult to deal with, as he moves around more and it's harder to hit him. However, recall how his horns sparkle. If you deal enough damage to them, he'll stagger, resetting the charge and keeping him grounded a while longer. This requires you to frequently hit Alatreon's head, which is easier said than done. However, if you pay attention to his moveset, you will notice that many of his attacks have about his head, and if you're quick, you can get some free hits in before backing off. In MHTri, breaking both of Alatreon's horns will fully prevent him from going into flight mode. The Sacred Land has walls on the edges of the arena. If you bait Alatreon into charging them, he can get stuck, which buys you some free time. Alatreon returned for Portable Third. In this game, he was a secret boss unlocked by clearing all dual monster quests in the high rank hub. He's once again encountered in the Sacred Land, and has some major additions. The thunder charge on his horns is more prominent. In Try it was a sparkle, but in this game it's more of a glow. Alatreon's flight mode can no longer be permanently disabled by breaking both of his horns. In terms of new attacks, he can swing his head twice, launching you away. In Dragon mode, he can rise up and spin in the air, before immediately landing. Instead of breathing into the air and forming icy chunks that fall on you, he can now spit them out directly, which is often far more accurate. While in flight mode but on the ground, Alatreon can now cause thunder to rapidly strike, both directly forwards in a row, but also around him. He can cause thunder element to strike while in the air, but this time targeting you directly. After the thunder strikes, he will often taunt, giving you a chance to strike his head. Alatreon is also in 3 ultimates. Curiously, in this game there is only one way to unlock him, which is to beat all the village quests and high rank. Otherwise, he would only be available in the hub through downloadable event quests. The biggest change made to 3 Ultimate Alatreon is that he will no longer charge up to eventually begin flight mode, and this means there's no way to prevent it from happening, not even temporarily. Generally he'll enter it when he becomes enraged. He also taunts even more than he did in Portable Third. In G rank, Alatreon can do the grounded thunder attack, but make it target you accurately. Alatreon's next appearance was in Monster Hunter Generations. The Sacred Land is not in this game. Instead, Alatreon is fought in the battle arena in Ghoul Isle. As such, it is no longer possible to lure him into walls for free damage. He's pretty much identical to his 3 ultimate self. The horn charging isn't there, he still taunts a lot, but in this game he has some graphical differences, mostly the fact that he's more detailed and his lightning is purple. He can also be mounted, which has him rise up into the air in an attempt to shake you off. In Monster Hunter Generations, He's the last monster to be unlocked, and in Generations Ultimate, he's 4th last. Alatreon returned once more for Monster Hunter World Iceborne, completely remade from scratch for a post-launch boss fight. In this game, he is fought in the 3rd area of the Secluded Valley, which he burns down in a cutscene. Whenever a final boss was introduced, they would often not be given a unique icon until later. This has been the case with most of them. Alatreon and Fatalis were notable exceptions because even after multiple appearances, their icons would still be depicted as question marks due to them being very mysterious. As of Iceborne, this is no longer the case, as both of them were given new icons, with Alatreon's depicting his 2 elemental states. Alatreon has been completely reworked for Iceborne and is now a massively different fight. First of all, his states have been changed. In the older games he had fire and dragon and would use them on the ground, before eventually changing to thunder and ice and fighting mostly in the air. But in Iceborne, he now has 3 different states: fire active, dragon active, and ice active, which dictates which elements he will mostly use. In the older games he would always start with fire and dragon, but here he can start with either fire or ice depending on the quest. The first assignment you face Alatreon in is always in fire mode, but once you've beaten it, you'll be able to refight him through event quests. The quest, The Evening Star, has him start in fire active mode, while Dawn of the Death Star has him begin in ice active. These quests rotate daily. Let's start with fire active mode. Alatreon has many more advanced fire attacks, including a flamethrower he can shoot forwards as well as in an arc. He can also shoot delayed explosions on the ground, either in rings or a V-shape. He can briefly rise into the air and aim flames downwards, causing constant damage and requiring you to move away. Now just because it's called fire active does not mean he can't use more elements, as he's capable of performing plunder attacks straight from his horns. These can either be his portable 3rd attack, where they strike around him randomly, or a new one, where they strike repeatedly in straight lines. Once again, Alatreon's physical attacks are imbued with dragon energy, including a new slam he can do that causes a hard knockdown. His old horn swing now deals Dragon Blight, as does his tail swing. His charge is also straight ahead, rather than curved like in the older games, and he will often double it up. Alatreon still has flight mode, but this time for every elemental state. For fire active, he shoots a ball and jumps back, and from here he can use flamethrower attacks either side to side, straight ahead, or in an arc. A new addition is that Alatreon can finally use water elements. In this case, it's an oil-like substance that he fires in globs while in flight mode, causing water blight if they hit you. They remain on the ground as puddles and can be set on fire, passively damaging anyone who stands on them. He can do his old dash too, but it's much faster, and dragon element this time. He ends flight mode with a downwards flame attack, but this time he spreads the flames across the arena, igniting any oil puddles. Alatreon's ice active mode still has him use physical dragon element attacks, as well as thunder strikes from his horns. The ice attacks include breath that he can shoot forwards, or downwards as he rises into the air, which rapidly damages you if you don't get out of the way. He can also shoot huge chunks of ice that land on the ground and stay there. Over time they'll turn red and eventually explode. Flight mode is initiated by Alatreon breathing frost into the air, which, like in the older games, creates those icy crystals mentioned earlier. He can still launch them from his mouth, and now can also shoot the oil as a beam. Alatreon's dragon active state is entered after fire or ice when he releases a huge dragon element explosion and changes colours to a very beautiful shade of purple. His dragon active state is the only time his horns can be broken. Alatreon will perform that stationary nuke just because, but also an aerial version that has him charge and then dash forward towards his target. He will also use fire, ice, thunder and water attacks in this state. So, the time has finally come to discuss the elephant in the room. Alatreon will either start in fire or ice active mode, switch to dragon, and then the opposite of what he started as. So for example, fire, then dragon, then ice, then back to dragon, and then back to fire. But whenever Alatreon switches from dragon active to fire or ice, he'll let loose with a devastating attack called Escaton Judgement.
Alatreon's readying a big attack. Get your healing items ready.
How devastating? You die. It kills you. Unbelievably fast. So think about that pattern again. He'll start off in fire, switch to dragon, Escaton Judgement to ice, then back to dragon, then Escaton Judgement to fire, and so on. So how do you stop Escaton Judgement from happening? You can't. But what you can do is suppress it by dealing enough elemental damage, which will have Alatreon fall over and the NPCs informing you that he's been suppressed. Escaton will still hurt and can potentially still kill you, but it's possible to heal through it and continue fighting. Escaton Judgement can be suppressed up to 4 times if you deal enough elemental damage, weakening the attack even more and granting more topples. It's fairly hard to do without experience though. It's worth mentioning that during an elemental topple, Alatreon will take massive damage from every element while he's on the floor, but this state ends when he gets up. Speaking of elemental damage, when Alatreon is fire active, ice weapons deal a lot of elemental damage, and when he's ice active, you'll want to use a fire weapon. Both types do well against dragon active. But now a problem arises. Bringing an ice weapon is all well and good when you need to suppress Escaton in fire active, but ice weapons deal 0 elemental damage when Alatreon is ice active, and it's the same for fire weapons for fire active. So what are you to do? Do you recall how Alatreon's horns can only be broken in his dragon active state? Well, it turns out if you break a horn, he will not be able to switch to the opposing element. So if he starts in fire active and switches to dragon, and you break a horn while he's like that, he will simply Escaton Judgement back to fire active, allowing you to keep dealing effective elemental ice damage. This of course is the same for breaking a horn after ice active mode. He will just go back to that. So the optimal Alatreon run for an ice weapon user hunting the Evening Star would go something like this. Alatreon starts off in fire active mode. The player deals lots of damage. The player eventually suppresses Escaton, getting that special knockdown. Alatreon switches to dragon. The player begins targeting the head. The player eventually breaks a horn. Alatreon Escaton Judgements his way back to fire, and repeats. Alatreon's horn can be broken twice, so his change to the opposite element can be delayed twice. But if he's dragon active once more and there's no more horns to break, he will switch to ice active element. And if you have an ice weapon, you're kind of doomed. In theory that is, because Alatreon will likely be very close to dying, if not already dead by then. I've discussed fire and ice weapons, but what about the others? Out of the main 5 elements, dragon is the worst to use when Alatreon is fire or ice active, as it barely does any elemental damage. However, it is the most effective when he's dragon active. Water deals a good amount of damage when Alatreon is fire or dragon active, but less so than ice would. But unlike ice, it still deals some damage when Alatreon is ice active, so you're not locked out of suppressing Escaton there. Likewise, thunder is less effective against ice and dragon than fire weapons would be, but it can still do some damage when Alatreon is fire active. Generally they're less effective than the fire-ice strategy, but still viable, and as long as he fights hard enough you should still be okay. My understanding is that dragon element is hard mode. You barely deal any elemental damage in fire or ice mode, but deal the most in dragon active, which seems like not a very good strategy. To account for different weapons dealing elemental damage at different rates, a scaling system was implemented to help weapons like greatsword or gunlance suppress Escaton with less hits, since they attack much slower than a weapon like dual swords. If you're playing solo, it is also possible to win by using a non-elemental weapon, since you're still allowed 3 total deaths, so you just need to deal enough damage before Alatreon does a 3rd Escaton Judgement. My first Alatreon was in Generations Ultimate. I found him fairly tricky due to his giant size and wide-reaching attacks, but I beat him. I thought he was overrated. I could not see the hype behind him. I later fought the Iceborne Alatreon with a friend and that was an experience. I was really surprised to find that the original fight in Tri had the mechanic to suppress flight mode. I didn't fight that one, but I did face the portable 3rd version, and the mechanic made the fight so much more interesting. Alatreon's flight mode was fairly annoying, and being able to prevent it by targeting the head was very satisfying, especially because Alatreon's head is rarely within reach. It's so wild that you used to be able to disable it entirely. I wonder why they got rid of that. In the older games, you used to be able to permanently disable Koshala's wind barrier and Teostra's flame aura by breaking their horns and tail. But maybe with Alatreon they figured that removing his ability to fly was a step too far. The problem is that they didn't replace it with anything better, so in 3 and Generations Ultimate, he's kind of boring. In fact, the GU version is easily the worst one, and it's almost entirely because of Ingol Isle. The Sacred Land was exclusive to Alatreon, which made it feel special. Ingol Isle in Generations is shared with basically everyone. The lighting also sucks, and it's hard to make out the visual differences between Alatreon's different states. I do like the purple lightning though. So, what do I think about Iceborne Alatreon? Well, he's very hard for one, and that means overcoming him was more satisfying. I really like how he has so many more attacks now, that's a big improvement over the original. His sound overhaul too. In the older games he sounds very similar to Teostra, but here it's more unique, although his roars do hurt my ears. and I'll never be able to unhear the guy saying hey in his main roar. Like, listen closely, you can hear a guy saying hey. Escaton Judgement is the huge issue people had with this fight. Like, they review bombed the game over it, which is just ridiculous. I have things to say about Escaton, but part of me thinks it would be an interesting video topic in the future, so we'll leave it here. But what I will say is that I think being able to suppress it to reduce its damage is better than having to stand behind a rock. Mechanically, it ties the whole elemental state switching thing together too, especially with the horn breaking aspect. Once I learned that breaking them stops him from going to the opposite element, I didn't start loving the fight, but I understood the vision. And it is really funny that with this DPS check and the horn break mechanics, Iceborne Alatreon is sort of a return to form. So, that's the end of Most Hunter Evolution. This is the final episode, number 45. We started in February 2022 with Fatalis, and we end in May 2024 with Alatreon. We covered so many different monsters in between them, I think we're finally at the point to bring things to an end. Initially the series was envisioned for a few reasons. The first is that I wanted to do weekly uploads, and the series was perfect for that. I could release a few evolution videos between my bigger releases, and it would all add up. The second was that I used to watch a lot of Monster Hunter YouTube back in the day, and one thing I always wanted to see from people were monster history videos, where we could see how their movesets had expanded and changed over the years, but nobody ever did it, or wanted to do it. So eventually I had enough, and decided to do it myself. Initially I wanted the whole thing to be 10 episodes, but after that I wanted to keep going. Partly because the series was pretty popular, but also because I found that with every video I was gaining a deeper appreciation for every monster I covered. In particular, Tigrex. I did not think highly of him prior to the evolution video, but after writing about him, I came to understand him on a deeper level, why he fights like that, why he does what he does, and it's the same for a lot of other monsters too. Right now we're at the point where I've covered a lot of monsters. If you don't count subspecies and variants, it's 65, and if you do, then it's 132. There's not much else to really cover that would be entertaining for you or me. Like, I'm sorry, but how many of you really want to see the evolution of Gypsaros? I'm no longer doing weekly uploads just because things are a bit busier, but that means that technically I can put more time into videos. The series was envisioned as something that could release weekly, so on some level it was rather basic. I cover the moveset, how it changed, then I give my thoughts at the end. But I am capable of doing a lot more, and I realised this when writing the Safi'jiiva episode, and to a greater extent for the Siege Monsters video, which was also supposed to be an evolution video, before I decided to take it further. Essentially, the evolution series has run its course, and it's good to end it with Alatreon. In terms of the future, I will eventually release a volume 3 of all the season 3 evolution videos, from Great Jaggi to Alatreon. I also might revisit the series for Monster Hunter Wilds, maybe with an update video like with Sunbreak. I hope you enjoyed the evolution of Alatreon, and I very much hope you enjoyed Monster Hunter Evolution. Remember to like and subscribe, and have a good day.